So yeah, well you saw earlier on, I am a poet. I am a poet, and by that I don't mean I have a poetic soul, and I don't mean that I daydream in notebooks in between serving cappuccinos to impatient wankers, although I did once do that. It means that being a poet is my actual job. It's what I get paid for. When I ring up the car insurance people, I tell them I'm a poet, and it confuses them for a long time. When I got married, I wrote poet on my marriage certificate there's someone else wrote it. I didn't just write it in crayon. So, it's on the birth certificates of my children. In my tax return, I write poet. When people say, oh, so, well, what do you do? I say poet, right? But what does that actually mean? It doesn't mean I just sit in a room all day writing poems, waiting for the checks to arrive, although that would be quite a nice way of living your life. It means that for me, being an artist in the modern world is that I don't just create the art, but I also manage my own career. I like to think of myself as a bit of a DIY artist. Now, that's the way for many, many artists, right? And some people might think that's quite a sad thing, that these rarefied beings have to manage their own careers and deal with the grubby work of invoicing and admin and those sort of things. But I really embrace that. I think if I just sat in a room all day and just wrote poems all day, then I'd probably run out of things to write about. So I really embrace that side of existing. Now, there are plenty of artists out there who don't manage their own careers. You know, if you think about like the big name musicians or comedians, those guys don't manage their own careers. They can afford personnel to do all that sort of stuff for them. In fact, many people in music and comedy these days as well don't even have to be famous before that happens. You know, you get snapped up by some management company very, very early on. But I don't really envy those guys. I remember once doing a theatre show at a place called the Old Red Lion in London, which is a lovely little pub theatre. And the week before had been this comedian who'd been on TV a few years before he was doing his show. He wasn't on TV anymore. He was still great, but he was kind of doing slightly more complex sort of political work, and he was doing this theatre run. And he'd recently parted with his management company. And I was really excited that he'd been there the week before me, and I was saying to the manager, oh, it's great, you had Rob Newman here last week. Oh, it's really exciting. And she said, oh yeah, well he turned up and he didn't have a technician or a stage manager or anything. He hadn't done posters. He just kind of thought someone else would do all that stuff for him because he'd never done all that stuff before. He'd always had like a big management company to take care of that sort of stuff. And at that moment, I realised I was actually quite lucky that in poetry, because it's not this great big industry with loads of money in it, there aren't all these other people sort of sniffing around you trying to get a slice of the action. You have to kind of do everything yourself. And I think it's done me a lot of good over the years. So I'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of that, of running your own career. But first of all, the most important thing you've got to have if you want to be an artist is passion, right? And I have to say that first because I'm going to talk about money and admin and all those sort of things, but the most important thing is passion. Now, I wasn't aware of performance poetry when I was in my first year, when I started sixth form college, when I was your age. I'm guessing your first year and second year sixth form, like you guys, yeah? Is that correct? No? Younger? Oh, okay, right, okay, first year in year 11. Okay, so when I was your age, I hadn't heard of it. I was really into music, and I went on a songwriting course run by a guy called Martin Newell, who was this sort of old rocker who never quite made it big, but wrote some beautiful songs, and he was a local guy in Colchester, and he was saying that how he now wrote poetry, and I thought, oh, poetry. When I was at school. And I went along to go watch it. I thought he was amazing though, so I went to go watch him do a poetry gig, and he was on with a guy called John Cooper Clarke, who some of you guys might have heard of now, who was a famous punk poet, and a young guy called Ross Sutherland. And I can tell you the date, it was the 12th of December, 1998, and that gig changed my life. I just thought, wow. It was like, I'd never seen anything like it before. It was like a cross between being the front man of a band, but also a comedian, but with some sort of emotional depth to it as well. And it just looked cool, right? And you know, I knew at that moment that that's what I wanted to do. Like I wanted to do what those guys did. It was clever, it was thoughtful, it was political, it was sonorous. And I thought, imagine that. Imagine being those guys. Imagine being able to travel around the country, the world, and share your opinions in rhyme, have everybody hang on your every word, and then at the end of it, get paid for it. Like I thought that was like a dream come true. And yeah, fair enough. It's not being a film star or a rock star, but for me, it made sense. And I already wrote songs. Like I was in a band, a really bad band. We were called Canunga Hill. We were worse than our name. Okay, yeah. So we wanted to be Blur, but we had the musical talent of Oasis. So if you can imagine that kind of strange mix there. But I knew at that moment that all that creative impulse that I had needed to be channeled into this idea of doing poetry. And so within, I think it was like 32 days later, it was the 13th of January, 1999, the day before my 17th birthday, I managed to convince one of the English teachers at college to let me do some poems, because every other Friday they had like an acoustic gig on what we call the concourse. It was where all like what we call townies hung out, yeah. So lads in tracksuits, basically, not big poetry fans. They were there in the audience, and I did my poems in front of them, and they hated it. But you know, and I was bad. I should say I was bad. I think it was great what you were saying earlier on about natural talent and hard work. You have to have an aptitude for things, sure, but essentially it's hard work. And when I started doing poetry, I was rubbish, yeah, like I was dealing in cliches, the rhymes were cheesy, the rhythm was off, the meter was off. I wasn't very, very good. But you have to learn these things in public, you know. If you want to go and train to be a plumber, you get to do it kind of in private as an apprentice to somebody else. If you want to be a lawyer, you get to go to law school. You don't have to like go and do a case, right, first out of school. And that's what you have to do if you're a performer. You have to get up there and have a go, and you have to embarrass yourself, and you have to be shit, basically, in order to get better. So I did that, and I met up with this guy, Ross, who I'd seen perform with John Cooper Clarke and Martin Yule, and he was only a couple of years older than me, and he didn't know anyone our age doing it, and I didn't know anyone our age doing it, and so we just sort of set out trying to make it as a poet. But like, we didn't really know what that meant. We just thought, well, we'd have to get famous, right? Because the people who'd gone before us, and it's really important to look at people who've gone before you, because again, as I say, if you wanted to be a plumber, you could be an apprentice, you know. If you wanted to go to law school, you could go to law school. If you wanted to be a journalist, you could do a journalism degree. But and who tells you how to be a performance poet? Like, no one does. You have to look to the people who are sort of doing it and think, well, how do they do it? Well, most of the people I saw come before me had records out and got a bit famous off the back of some musical movement. Murray Luckland-Young was the £1 Million poet during Britpop. John Cooper Clarke was the punk poet. Attila the Stockbroker was a sort of punk poet as well, kind of new wave ranting poet. And I couldn't do any of that stuff. I had no desire so I didn't really know what to do. It was a bit confusing. But I wish someone had sort of taken me aside at that stage and explained what I'm going to explain to you now. Now, everything I tell you is going to relate specifically to my career as a poet, but I think a lot of this advice would work for any kind of artist, really. You know, no matter what you want to do, whether you want to be like a theatre practitioner or a musician or a visual artist. So what I've now learned is that, you know, there are like 4 ways that I can make money as a poet. And I didn't even think about any of that stuff. I didn't really care about that stuff when I started off. And I think it's right not to care about that stuff initially. But after a while, you know, you're hungry. And so I realised that you can get paid for doing a gig, for reading out your poems in public. I realised that you could get paid for running workshops and doing educational things, and lots of poets survive in that way. They do workshops for both teenagers, but also for grown-ups as well. There are loads of creative writing places like the Arvon Centre where you can do that sort of stuff. You can write commissions, either for like media outlets like the BBC, or maybe for an arts project. Maybe Sunderland wants to have an arts project to celebrate how great Sunderland is, and someone's going to paint a massive mural in public, and they're going to get a poet to write a little poem, and they're going to set it in a mosaic or something like that. Stuff like that happens with public money, and you can get commissions there. You're going to get commissions writing for adverts, like, I don't know if you've seen, there's a poet called George the Poet who's recently done an advert for the Jeep Renegade, where he tries to convince you that if you buy a Jeep, you're somehow a rebel. Not for me, that's a bit yuck, but yeah, you can make money doing that. Also, you can make money by selling books and CDs, getting royalties from your stuff. So I realised there was all these ways of making it happen. So be aware of the market you are entering. I know that's getting a bit like business studies speak now. I'm aware of that. Look, I'm not cool with that, but we've got to realise the realities of it. You know, you are entering a marketplace. You need to know how it works. If you were going to go and sell like T-shirts on a market stall, you'd have some idea about what price those T-shirts should be, who might be interested in buying those T-shirts, where to go to sell the T-shirts. That's just common business sense, right? And the same thing's the same with the art. You need to understand you know, what you're putting out there. So it's important to know how people will see you as an artist. Like, you might not like to think of yourself as a brand or having a sort of professional persona, but that is how other people are going to see you. I don't know if any of you guys are into comedy. I might use that as an example because it's probably a bit more sort of popular than poetry. But if you think about all the comedians you know, you probably, if you'd seen a comedian you really, really liked, you might want to then tell your friend about them. So how would you do that? You wouldn't sort of like you know, repeat their act. You might, if you really like them, just do the whole act. But you'd probably find a couple of lines to sum that person up. You should say, oh yeah, there's this guy, he's called Russell Brand, he's great. Oh, he's kind of like, he uses big words, and he's got loads of hair, and or whatever you might describe Russell Brand as. But you would find some shorthand way of describing that person, and that's what people are going to do about you as an artist, yeah. So whether it be like a newspaper summing you up, whether it be a box office manager instructing her staff on how best to sell tickets to your show, whether it's going to be the fan who writes your Wikipedia page, or whether it's just going to be somebody at the sixth form cafeteria telling their mate about you. People are going to start summing you up in a few sentences, and it's worth you knowing, you know, what those sentences might be. What kind of words would you like associated with you, you know, when someone describes your work? Like, I hope people say that I'm funny, or my work's funny. I hope people say that my work is political. I hope people say that I use different emotions in my work. They're the things that I mainly want to get across in my work. And so I kind of think about that when I write copy for my shows, or you know, or when I do press releases and those sort of things. So it's good to know, you know, how people are going to sum you up. Are you the Darwinist hip-hop poet? Are you the poet of the everyday with a penchant for radio? You might laugh at those examples. Those are two actual people I'm thinking of in my head when I say that. Okay, so once you've thought about who you are as an artist, it's important to think about, like, product, okay? So I write poems, and part of me wants to put that poem in a box, to turn away, and then when I turn back to the box, for there to be some money in that box, and I can take that out and spend it on goods and services. That would be a nice life, but it doesn't work like that, because you can't sell individual poems. If you were a portrait artist, you could sell your individual portraits. That could work, but it doesn't work like that with poems. So I need to find a way of packaging my poems up in a way that I can make money for them. So the first thing I did is I made like a 20-minute set, and I started getting bookings at poetry clubs and comedy clubs. Someone asked me how you even get that far. Well, you start off by doing open mics, which anyone can do. Again, if you were keen on it, you'd have been to these events already. So I had my 20-minute set, and I started going along to nights, right? And what happened is I go to like the Crazy Cat Comedy Club. They've always got shit names. And there'd be 6 acts on, and we'd go in, all the audience would go in, they'd pay their $5, and all that money would be pulled up at the end, and they'd split it amongst the acts, skimming a bit off for the promoter. And I quickly realised that I couldn't make enough money doing that, okay? There just wasn't enough gigs to go around. And also, people weren't paying for me, they were paying for the Crazy Cat Comedy Club, which I was a small component part. So I realised that I needed a new product, a bigger, better product. So I started making one-man shows. Okay, and that way I could be the whole evening's entertainment. And then I come to an arrangement with the venue, whereas you know, they charge £10 for a ticket. If you notice, it's gone up from when there were 6 of us on the bill. That's how one-man shows work. And the venue will take 30%, and I'll take 70%. Or the venue, better yet, will take all of it and just give me a set fee, and that way I don't have to worry about the venue not promoting the gig and those things. So I did that, and I found I could make a living out of that. I found then by diversifying and adding other products to that, I could make a better living. So I would take a CD and a book that I produced along to the gigs, and I would sell those CDs and books at the gigs, and that would supplement my income. I came up with a few workshops and a few creative writing exercises, and once people started seeing me at gigs and going, oh, I really liked your stuff. I'm a teacher at a school in Stockport down the road. Do you want to come and do a workshop? Oh yes, I could come do a workshop, and all of a sudden you start building and building and building from there. So that's your product. So once you've got your product, though, it's not enough just to have the product and just go, I've got it. You know, you have to then promote yourself. And the biggest and best thing that I ever did was that I went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So you guys know about the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, yeah? It's the world's biggest arts festival, and it's not curated. Like, no one says you can or you can't come into the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Right? So if you've got £300 to enter their programme, then you can come and do a show there. You've got to find yourself a venue, but again, a lot of the venues, as long as they're getting a cut of your ticket money, or you're paying them a rental fee, then you can come in and do that. And now it's even easier to enter, because they have this thing called the Free Fringe up there, where there's loads and loads of free shows. And again, you just got to do the application process. It's pretty egalitarian. They let people in. And as long as they think you're keen and you're going to work hard, you can come do a show. And that saves huge costs, because some of the venues charge lots of money. Again, I won't get into the ins and outs of that. So if you're interested in that, that's something you should look up. But the Edinburgh Fringe Festival is great because it's kind of a level playing field. Sure, if you're a big name comedian, you can go up there with stacks of money and you can buy billboards with your big wacky face on it, and you can have 300 people out there flyering for your show every single day. You can have the best PR who knows everyone, who can try and get you like interviews and stuff like that. But essentially, if you've then written a rubbish show, the reviewers will come along and say, nah, don't bother, mate, it's rubbish, he's gone off the boil. However, you could be like totally unheard of, as I was when I was 20, go up there, do a little show and be out there all day flyer, and you get 10, 15 people to come along and watch your show, and you try your best, and eventually a reviewer will come and say, this is really good, and give it 5 stars, even though no one's ever heard of you. Right? And all of a sudden you're up there and your review is bigger and better than the review of the famous comedian of the telly who's next to you. And after a few years of doing that, we found that art centres and theatres were prepared to give us a fee or ask us to come and bring our show and put it in their programme, and that made a huge difference. But so that's a very old-fashioned way of promoting yourself, and it's really important if you're in the arts. Find a platform that's got a bigger audience than you and get yourself put in there. But there's other ways you can do it from your bedroom these days. You guys are really lucky, and I risk of sounding like an old person, right? Like the stuff you can do now with your phones or your tablets or your laptops. And I'm not talking about expensive equipment, I'm talking about equipment that probably most people have or have access to. The stuff you can do with that is amazing. You can run an empire from your laptop, and this sort of stuff always really, really excites me. I mean, it takes a matter of minutes, and I sort of imagine it's stuff that you guys have all almost pretty much grown up with all your lives, that you can write a song or write a poem, and then you can set up a Tumblr or a WordPress, and that can be your little shop window to the world. You can like record that poem or song or whatever it is using a camera phone in pretty good high quality, right? And then you can put that on YouTube, or you can put it on SoundCloud in a matter of seconds. If you wanted to do an album with buying a cheapish sort of microphone and plugging it into like pretty cheap software on an iPad, you can have studio quality sound, and you can record that album, and then you can design your own artwork on another app, and then you can send it off to somewhere that will print CDs for you, at sort of 50p a CD. And then you can sell those CDs for like £5, £10. And then all of a sudden you've got a product. You can do the whole thing from your laptop. It's quite exciting. And I've seen loads of people come along and do just that. Like in 2005, when we were up at Edinburgh, we had a young drama student fly for us. And she played us one of her songs. And we were like, oh, this is really cool. How did you do that? She said, oh, I made it on GarageBand. And we're like, oh, that's really great, And 6 months later, she had signed the record contract. That person was Kate Nash, right? And she's now like very, very famous and has done very, very well and released loads of albums. And she started off making stuff on her laptop, setting up a MySpace page and international stardom. I'm not saying that's going to happen to everyone, but generally, if you fly for me, then you get famous. So it's just something to bear in mind. But that is, it kind of blows my mind when that sort of stuff can happen. Like I know plenty of poets, people like Mark Grist and Holly McNish, who've got huge, huge online profiles, like, millions and millions of views of their poems, because they're writing about something that's relevant and interesting to people, and the good will out. If it's out there, people will want to watch it and they'll want to share it. So you can do all that stuff without even doing a gig, although I think doing gigs are great. So there's that. So it's never been easier to promote yourself, and it feels like there's a lot of people out there all shouting, but if you work hard, like David said, if you put the time and effort in, then you now have the means to get your stuff out there. So anyway, I feel like I've talked for a long time. Just want to say one more thing before I wrap up, and that is, it's really important to look around you at your peers and look around at the other people who are doing the things you love. I mean, if you want to be a poet, for example, you'll love poetry already, and you'll probably have your favourite poets, and it's worth looking at what those guys have achieved. If I was a young person starting out today, I'd be looking at Holly McNish or Kate Tempest or Scroobius Pip and looking at what those guys have done and thinking, well, if they've done those gigs and put that stuff out and written that way, then maybe I'll start doing that as well. And it's really good that we've got these trailblazers now who are showing you the way. Because as I said, there isn't like an A-level in performance poetry. There isn't an A-level in or a university course in a lot of these artistic careers. But I think the best advice, I should say that I think it's really important to always keep looking around you and to be aware, because everything changes. So I might know how to do it now. I might know how to do a CD and it's got this sort of stuff out there, but the technology changes and the industry changes all the time. So you need to not rest on your laurels. You need to always be aware of that stuff. But the best piece of advice I ever got was, don't waste your life looking sideways. And by that, the person giving me the advice meant, don't always be looking at that person over there and going, not fair. How did they get that gig? Not fair. How did they get that success, you know? Because you can do that. And sometimes in the arts, it feels like there's a bit of luck involved. Sometimes we can feel lucky, sometimes we can feel unlucky. And it's amazing how we dwell on the moments when we've been unlucky. But if you spend your life being jealous of other people and looking sideways, then you're not looking at where you're going. And that's the best advice I ever got told. And I think I got obsessed with the minutiae of it all. I fully believe in being a DIY artist. I think it's really, really important. I'm not knocking those traditional structures. Sure, they can find you new markets. Having a manager, having a publicist, having a record company, having a publishers, all that stuff is good. And that might be right for you at some point. But it doesn't mean that you can't go it alone. But if you do, just be careful that you don't get caught up with all those details, and remember what it was that made you want to do it in the first place. Remember that moment of wow that you felt on that first night. Good luck with it. Cheers.